The Saints are running it back with Derek Carr, Chris Olave, and Alvin Kamara as their offensive core this season. Hopefully this time things start to click much faster than last year. We dig into the fantasy outlook for the entire Saints offense in today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com. Right now, I'm at the beach, so excuse that, but we are still going to record. We still have to bring you some fantasy goodness here, and we will break down the New Orleans Saints on today's show.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We are going through all 32 NFL teams and digging into their entire offense and their fantasy outlook for the 2024 season. Each team gets their own episode. We have gone through almost all the NFC teams now. We just have to finish off the NFC South. We did the Falcons last week. So starting with the Saints today, the Saints didn't really change anything this offseason, right? They're going in with the same core of Derek Carr and shockingly Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave coming into his third season. Last year, they just missed the playoffs, but they're a pretty solid offense overall, averaged the 9th most points per game in the NFL, 10th most fantasy points per game. Their real only loss this offseason on offense is Michael Thomas, but is that really a loss? Probably not. But they also didn't really add any pieces either. So I want to start with the backfield because last year, Alvin Kamara was their top fantasy scorer on the team, right? And I think the backfield is really the most enticing situation here because Kamara finishes as the RB5 in points per game last year in half PPR. We saw his target share decrease towards the end of the season while the team got much better, right? Derek Carr was so much better, not checking it down to Alvin Kamara all the time. Kamara's turning 29 years old. He wants a new contract or, he wants his contract kind of fixed to get more money there. I thought they were going to cut him, but he's still on the team. They could have saved $10 million against the cap this season, $25 million against the cap next season if they were to cut him or trade him right now. Are you shocked, Vinny, that Alvin Kamara is still on the Saints as of right now?
Yeah, I think they're maybe committed to him, maybe looking at a new offensive style here with Clint Kubiak coming over. That's really the only change, but I don't know if it's too much of a change in general. I mean, it was very interesting that they were pretty good, as Michelle pointed out, with Pete Carmichael Jr. There are some concepts that cross over here with Clint Kubiak taking over. The zone blocking, I think they've seen Alvin Kamara do pretty well in that system as well. So maybe they're afraid to let him go because they still think they're a contender, right? Which is very odd. I think every team in this division thinks they're a contender because it's so mediocre. But what does that mean? Does that mean winning a game like the Bucs and getting into the divisional playoffs? Is that all it means? Or do the Saints really need to think about rebuilding? I mean, they're a little bit, I think, behind right now because the Falcons have all their offensive skill players. The Bucs are well settled here with their veteran core. And we know the Panthers are at least blowing everything up to try to get the same page. But here they're just kind of status quo, as Michelle said. It's like they're just rolling with Alvin Kamara. It took them a while to get rid of Michael Thomas here. So I'm not sure. I mean, this is very high for last year. I would think that Alvin Kamara finishes the RB8. But a lot of that, as we pointed out, a lot of checkdowns, ugly things that were just racking up cheapy PPR and half-point PPR points. Like his explosiveness wasn't there as a runner. He didn't do all that much. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to be totally investing in Alvin Kamara. He's old. He's had a lot of touches over his career in the passing game. He's had ankle issues. The durability's there. He was the average RB8, but he was also very shaky there with his durability. So I'm out on Alvin Kamara. I don't see him RB17. Man, I mean, this is a big drop-off from last year, but it's still pretty high for me. I don't want to take him essentially as an elite RB2, Michelle. It's just too much because I think it's going to break down here.
Yeah, we did kind of see a breakdown at the end of last year. So remember, he was suspended the first 3 weeks, right? So weeks 4 through 13, he was averaging 8 targets per game, nearly 18 fantasy points per game in half PPR, like elite, right? But over from weeks 14 through 18, he averaged 4 targets per game. It was cut in half, 9.4 points per game. Like, not helpful whatsoever. I mean, those last 4 weeks he played RB20, RB14 fine, RB43, RB42 on the week. So we already saw those targets start to decline. Last year, he had his worst year in yards per touch at 4.5 yards per touch, by far his lowest. His career is normally around 5.5. So he's getting older, right? And he struggled with efficiency. Now there's still Kendre Miller, who's coming into his second year. They still have Jamal Williams. Do you think they cut into his workload at all? Because last season they did not at all.
Yeah, it is a new opportunity because it's a new style of running game, just slightly adjusted. But yeah, they got to look at Kendre Miller more. This is a very talented back out of TCU. Second year, I think he showed some upside last year. And Jamal Williams is just a guy at this point. I mean, he's someone who uses the goal line. He wasn't even that available for them last year. So I think Kendre Miller will cut into what Alvin Kamara does quite a bit at some point because he's just too good, I think, overall. And I think when you look at the cost, Michelle, RB43, way down there, I can get him almost 30 draft picks later at this position. I'm going to go for him. I just don't believe in Alvin Kamara too much. Again, we really focus on RB5, RB8, depending on the scoring system. That was his average. But again, the availability wasn't there. He had the suspension. There's all kinds of things going on with Alvin Kamara. So I don't know if you can count on him for enough games where that's going to pay off as much with Kamara. I think with Kamara, you're just not going to get that return at RB17 where you could see Kendre Miller finish way above RB43. So I think that's what you look at is who's the better value in your draft. Is what you're going to do with every position, every team. And Miller, I just think has upside. Kamara does not. I want to get that upside and that cheap draft pick.
Yeah, I mean, where Kendre Miller is going, it's almost no risk at all, right? I mean, he's going around guys like Ty Chandler and Antonio Gibson and Jalen Wright, who maybe as a rookie has upside, but still really, really risky. Rico Dotto, like those are the guys that Kendre Miller's going around. So, like, I would rather take a shot that he can take over this backfield. Maybe Kamara is a trade candidate in season if they don't end up cutting or trading him before the season. And when you're looking at Kamara, it's not even just about the running backs he's going around. I actually think when you look at his running back price, it's fair. He's going around Kenneth Walker and Aaron Jones and Ramondre Stevenson. Like, I think that's perfectly fair for him. But when you look at the wide receivers or the other players going around, like, there's no world I'm going to take Kamara over T. Higgins or Kamara over Terry McLaurin or Kamara over Kyle Pitts. So I think that's really the difference here when it comes to those two players. Now, let me ask you, if you're sitting here and you have to take a running back, would you rather Alvin Kamara or Aaron Jones, who are going back to back?
I think I'm taking Aaron Jones because I've seen what the Vikings have, and it's not all that good. And you also have to think that the Vikings actively got Aaron Jones, right? As soon as he was let go by the Packers, they actively went after him because they knew he was better than what they had. So that's important to note, where I think the Saints are kind of stuck in a little bit of a stalemate with Alvin Kamara trying to figure out what to do. So I think they would like to phase out Kamara. Yeah, we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and like just wait till the next round. You can get Najee Harris. I think we both prefer him greatly. You can get other running backs later in the draft that have upside like Alvin Kamara that are a little bit safer as well with the volume that they should be seeing. So I think we're just saying we're staying away from Alvin Kamara. We're open to taking out a shot on Kendre Miller super late in drafts, just for the chance that Kamara does, get injured or gets traded or, maybe just takes over because Kendre Miller is a talented prospect. We're going to get into Chris Olave, number one, right? And then the Saints wide receivers. They don't have a whole lot. It's Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and then a bunch of randoms. But we're going to talk about their fantasy outlook for the 2024 season right after the break.
All right, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Now, we just had the NBA Finals finish, but there's plenty to bet on here. We know the MLB season is going into full swing here. We have the All-Star break coming up, but still a lot of great action there that you can check out. That's where you have to get in on the action on FanDuel. here. So hopefully you had some success with the NBA Finals with the Celtics knocking off the Mavericks. But if you want to still join there and get in on the action for baseball, right now new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP, which hopefully you got there with Jaylen Brown and all the good stuff going there, and checking out now with the MLB season, all the props you can have on a day-to-day basis. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Check it out, fanduel.com/lockedon to get that bonus offer first. All right, Michelle, we will continue the show talking about surefire Saints fantasy producer Chris Olave. Let's break it down. Wide receiver 22 in points per game last year. Wide receiver 13, however, down the stretch from weeks 9 through 18. Now he's going as wide receiver 11, 17th overall. Is that where you'd want to take him, Michelle?
I think it's a fair cost for him. I mean, I do wish he had a different quarterback than Derek Carr, right? But it did finally start to click in the second half of the season. The first half, he was getting targeted a ton. He actually had way more targets from weeks 1 through 8 than he did weeks 9 through 18. He was averaging nearly 10 targets per game from weeks 1 through 8, but only 9.9 fantasy points per game. And then weeks 9 through 18, his targets actually went down by 2 targets per game. He was only averaging 7.5 targets per game, but his fantasy points went way up to 13.5 because his catch percentage increased, his yards per reception way increased, and then he started scoring more touchdowns as well. Scored 3 more touchdowns over that span than the first half. Like, I felt like the connection finally started to click with Carr and Olave. You saw the frustration on the field between these two in the first half of the season. Something ended up clicking. So I do think in their second year together, it will be better. Again, just taking that second half, like he would have finished as wide receiver 12 in a full season, taking the second half average of 13.5 points per game. Wide receiver 6 to 10 last year, average around 14 fantasy points per game. So it's definitely possible, right? He doesn't have to get all that much better to get up there to be a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. That's what you're looking for when you're taking a guy at 17th overall. I think it's fair. But then when you see the guys he's going around, like Marvin Harrison Jr. or Kyron Williams, I don't know if I'll pull the trigger on Olave, but I do think his price is very fair.
Yeah, I do love Chris Olave. I had him on my teams last year on multiple teams. I think he was just very consistent overall when you look at the bigger picture of things. Now, he could have exploded a little bit more. I think he had some very nice yardage games, and he would kind of start slowly in games. It wasn't just in the season, but you would see him like, where is he getting targeted? It's not happening. I think that's going to change a little bit. I think he's going to be treated more like the alpha. They're not going to have Michael Thomas in the background. So Chris Olave is just too talented. I mean, I just think it's just the thing that we overlook sometimes too much is this: how talented is this guy? Can he get open against anyone? And Chris Olave, the answer is yes. He's like Garrett Wilson, his teammate from Ohio State. He's just going to get it done for you in more weeks than not. And what you're hoping for is a few more spike weeks, right? Where he has like 3 catches for 117 and a touchdown or something like that, where he just has big plays that really add to his repertoire and just getting into the end zone as well. So I'm excited about Chris Olave. I'm going to take him easily. I guess, Michelle, the question comes down to, we'll start with this one. I'll throw this out. I know you'll have a few more, but Olave versus Wilson, I think that's a question for me yet again this year.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Wilson just because even coming off the Achilles, I think I trust Aaron Rodgers more than Derek Carr. Yeah, I don't know. It is really close. I think I just go Wilson because I think his upside's a little bit higher. I will say with Olave, he should score more touchdowns this year, right? He's really been struggling with scoring touchdowns. Only has 9 over his first 2 seasons. But like the one area Michael Thomas did kind of take away opportunities. He had 9 red zone targets last year, Michael Thomas. That was second most on the team. Olave did lead the team with 11. So if Michael Thomas is gone, Chris Olave already led the team. Like, more of those targets should go to him. I do expect for Olave to come down with more touchdowns. So, man, I don't know. Chris Olave versus Garrett Wilson. I know Wilson's the shinier prospect, and at first I was thinking just Wilson, but I think it's closer than people want to admit. What would you go with?
Yeah, I'm going Garrett Wilson. I cannot quit him. I took him last year ahead of Olave, and we know what happened. That was disappointing. And that was the one league I did not take Chris Olave in, and I felt really bad about it. But yeah, but circumstances happen, right? I mean, that was one situation that was very unique where the quarterback went down and his value really plummeted at wide receiver. But then he kind of got back up later in the year when they started getting some legit quarterbacks who at least feed him the ball a lot. So these guys are just alphas, and they're going to do that. Now, one guy I really like, and he had good chemistry with Derek Carr, and he's one of my favorite sleepers, is Rashid Shaheed. He's down at wide receiver 45 from points per game last year, but right now that doesn't merit that he should be dropping down to wide receiver 58, right? That seems really crazy. That he was a good player for them last year. I mean, he has a shot at 1,000 yards, 719 and 5 touchdowns last year. And again, Carr and Shaheed have pretty good chemistry, and there's no one else here. I mean, it's really getting thin. I mean, A.T. Perry and these types are after Rashid Shaheed and Cedric Wilson. They added Bub Means. I mean, that's a fun name to say, but I don't know the rookie or any of those kind of middling veterans are going to really threaten Shaheed or Olave for key targets, at least in the wide receiver core.
Yeah, Rashid Shaheed, I feel like will have the exact season as Gabe Davis this past year. Like some really big games, and then some games he completely disappears. We did see a handful of nice games from Shaheed last year, but they came so sporadically, right? Like you'd have a big game and then like 4 bad ones, and have a big game and 3 bad ones, and have a big game and a bad one. Like so, it was all over the place. Could he have a breakout year in his 3rd season without Michael Thomas there? Sure, but at the same time, he in the games he had at least 6 targets last year. That was 6 games. He averaged 54.8 receiving yards per game, 17 game pace for 932 receiving yards. So I don't think he'll see more than 6 targets per game this year. I cap him at about 1,000 receiving yards, maybe 6 receiving touchdowns. Would be a really solid year for a guy you can get at wide receiver 58. But it's going to come in chunk plays, in chunk games, right? Huge games and then down games. So I think his price is fair because he's going around those guys that we also expect for that to happen, right? He's going right around Brandon Cooks and Josh Downs and Gabe Davis himself, like guys that you expect to have those big games and down games. And I'm okay if you want to take a shot on Rashid Shaheed, who's 3rd year, and say maybe he can be more than that. But I do kind of see that's how his future is going to go, that he's just a very inconsistent type of fantasy player. But especially in like best ball leagues where you don't have to set a lineup, he could be a really nice value in any given week.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting sleeper for sure on the board. I mean, given the targets that are available, it's going to be fun to watch. And we'll see if they actually have some value at quarterback at tight end as well in our final segment.
Yeah, we're going to get into my favorite quarterback ever, Derek Carr. I just love to talk about him. That's sarcasm. I do not like him. But we will chat about Carr and actually a guy I really do like in Juwan Johnson right after the break. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Derek Carr last year finishes as quarterback 27 in points per game. However, to end the year, he actually had a really nice ending, right? So he scored 20 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, finishes the quarterback 8, quarterback 5, quarterback 17, not good. And then quarterback 1 over the last 4 games of the season. Of course, he'd wait to be the quarterback 1 in week 18 when no one has him, but that's beside the point. He did start to come on. So do you think that Derek Carr will play like he did at the end of last year or like he did for most of the season last year or something in the middle?
Well, here's something with Derek Carr. I mean, his absolute cap, and he's been around for a long time at this point. It's like quarterback 12 to 14. That's
no, wait. Can I read his ranks over the last 7 years? These are where he finished over the last 7 years in points per game, right? Quarterback 27, 2023, quarterback 23, quarterback 20, quarterback 21, quarterback 24, quarterback 29, quarterback 24. So his cap is quarterback 20 because over the last 7 seasons, he's never finished higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, if you get him, the one thing I'll say that helps Derek Carr is he stays on the field for the most part. He had the 1 year where he missed time, so he's a guy that will be out there if you're in a super flex or QB league or just looking for a backup to play in the right matchup. You know that Derek Carr is probably going to be available to start for you, and that's why he's kind of finishing higher when you look at overall. But when you break it down, as Michelle did, parse it per game, it's not very good. And here's a couple reasons why. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of big games. He also doesn't give you anything as a runner, just like absolutely nothing. And you're not going to get scoring from that at all. So it's just crazy to think that he's going to give you anything extra. So you're solely dependent on his passing. He's not going to give you any rushing touchdowns either. So you have to extract 30 TDs to have any value out of him whatsoever. And he's always been on teams that run the ball quite a bit. And I think the Saints are still going to do that here. So everything with Derek Carr just is ugly here. Ugly. Right now he's at QB 25. And based on what Michelle said, in terms of his average scoring, that's what you're going to get. Now he might finish in the teens in terms of just playing every game and scoring, but that's still not going to look very pretty and still not going to excite you one bit to start him. So I would reserve him for Superflex, QQB, backup.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I don't think he's really going to be considered in a 1 quarterback league unless you play in a 20 team league or something. But let's say you do play in a super flex or a 2 quarterback. He's going around guys like Bryce Young, Baker Mayfield, Russell Wilson. If you're eyeing those 4 right there, do the order of them with Derek Carr, Bryce Young, Baker Mayfield, and Russell Wilson. How order of desirable at their cost right now?
Okay, I don't know how to order the other 3, but I do know this, that Derek Carr is going to be 4th.
Yes.
So I just don't find any upside here. So I do like the way it's going here for Russell Wilson early. I like Baker Mayfield as well because we have a history of his production, and then Bryce Young. So I like all 3 of those guys. I think they're much more undervalued with some upside based on their passing attacks and their weapons than what we have with Derek Carr. So absolutely like all 3. I would say if you were going to put me on the spot now, I go Wilson. I think he'll have a better year than people think here. Wilson, Mayfield, Young, and then Carr. I do not want any part of Carr just because there's no upside. There's nothing there that I feel great about with Derek Carr.
Yeah, I agree with you. It is hard to rank the Young, Mayfield, Wilson. They're all really close for me, right? Because I do think Bryce Young will have a better second year. Hopefully, it'd be hard to have as bad. I'm excited with him with Dave Canales. He has weapons. He's a risk, but I still would rather take the risk than go with Derek Carr. Baker will just be better than Derek Carr because he just will be. And then Russell Wilson, still even last year when he gets benched, he was still quarterback 15 last year in points per game with Cortland Sutton and no one else. Russell Wilson is clearly the choice here over Derek Carr. So yeah, Derek Carr's not going to be on either of our teams, we decided, even in a super flex or 2 quarterback league. Now, Juwan Johnson, though, he's going as tight end 23. You can get him he's not even going in normal drafts, right? Get him super late, even in deep leagues. He was a tight end 18 in points per game last year. In tight end 18 means you did absolutely nothing, right? Averaged 6 points per game last season. So didn't really help you, except the end of the year, he started to come along. He scored 4 touchdowns in 13 games played last year. 7 touchdowns in 2022. I do think he'll be the touchdown guy for the Saints this year. He led the team in red zone targets from weeks 9 through 18. He did miss most of the first half of the season, so that's why I'm just using weeks 9 through 18. So the second half of the season, he was actually tied with Chris Olave for the most red zone targets at 5. And he was actually tied for the second most targets overall, not just red zone targets, on the team behind only Chris Olave from weeks 9 through 18. So I do expect him to be highly involved in this offense, and I do expect him to get those red zone and end zone targets. So I think he's a really sneaky value this year.
Yeah, this is the reason we're not too thrilled about Alvin Kamara, because I think you saw the passing game kind of get settled where Derek Carr, as Michelle mentioned, found the better chemistry with Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson. We thought these 2 guys were going to be like his new Devontae Adams and Darren Waller. To some degree, in a poor man's way, they were down the stretch. So we know Derek Carr likes to target the tight end. So Juwan Johnson is going to be more involved. And the targets line up, right? We have a lot of question marks at wide receiver beyond Olave and Shaheed. So Juwan Johnson, a bit of a tight end wide receiver hybrid. I've always liked his skill set. I just think he's been underutilized. Going back, I think he had one explosive 2-touchdown game with Jameis Winston against the Packers, and that kind of put him on the map. And he's been involved with different quarterbacks here since the Drew Brees era. So when I look at Juwan Johnson, yeah, he's very valuable here. At tight end 18, this is a good pickup here. If you're in a tight end premium league, he's a good guy that you can add there later, right? That's a bit of a steal. And I like what you put in the notes here, Michelle, that he's another ideal target if you're waiting on Brock Bowers to explode for the Raiders and have his key role over Michael Mayer, or you're waiting for TJ Hawkinson to get healthy for the Vikings. This is a great target to have because you can stream him early, get some value in certain matchups, and then you're set with the other tight end coming back whenever they are ready to be effective or fully healthy for your team.
Yeah, he's going after guys like Tyler Conklin, Kate and Chigo Okonkwo, Hunter Henry. Like, I think he has much more upside than any of those guys. And if not, then you drop him, right? He's the last pick, if anything, right? You could just get him off waivers after your draft if you really want to. But yeah, I really like Juwan Johnson as a sneaky pick this year. Yeah. That is it for today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football. Everydayers will be back tomorrow talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and my boy Baker Mayfield. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.